I want to talk a little bit about identity politics in the film industry. This is something I have touched on before, but there is a particular feature film that is going to be released that this pertains to, which is the Disney live action version of The Little Mermaid. Now, I have to be honest, The Little Mermaid, i.e., the 1989 version, is one of the Disney Renaissance films that I didn't actually see. I'm much more familiar with Beauty and the Beast and The Hunchback of Notre Dame, but it was kind of the marking point of that Disney Renaissance. And for people of about my age, we remember that red haired Ariel of that era. Now, let me just make a disclaimer before I go further. In the grand scheme of things, I really don't think that the casting of a fictional character for entertainment is like the world's biggest priority. There's far more serious things going on in the world, right? So you might say, why make a video about it? Well, I think it's because Hollywood in general, and Disney is part of that whole universe, I guess, um, is going down a path which is actually beyond entertainment. I mean, entertainment is being politicized. So that's why what should be a trivial issue actually has implications beyond that. So let's look at this a little bit. This is a controversy. The young lady who's going to play Ariel, Halle Bailey, is, as I understand it, African American. She's black, right? So she's very different from that 1989 version of Ariel who was white with red hair. The story, of course, like a lot of Disney stories, is based on a much older story um, written by Hans Christian Andersen. I'm not sure what year exactly, but certainly 19th century. That may indeed have been based on even older stories. Mermaids tended to be popularized. There's always been, going way, way back to the classical world, there's always been reports of mermaids. Um, but we tend to associate mermaids with the 18th century, the 17th and 18th century, that sort of seafaring era, where of course they lured sailors to their deaths. Ironically, actually, um, some versions of mermaids were not the beautiful young women we tend to think of, but ugly creatures. There is one shrunken merman that is said to haunt a pub in Devon in the southwest of England. He was kind of, or rather, he was a shrunken sailor who was cursed by a mermaid. So there's lots of different derivations of this. It's like any sort of folklore around the world. I mean, Aladdin, one of the original claims of the Aladdin story may be that the origins are actually Chinese. So who knows? Um, so this has provoked a bit of controversy, and the main thing is it's clearly Disney just trying to tick boxes. There was an interesting discussion debate about this on Melissa Chen's page. Melissa Chen, if you don't know, is an activist. I like a lot of her ideas. I'm connected with her now. I like a lot of the things she has to say, and she was making the point. If you check out her page, you'll see what I'm referring to, rather than me just paraphrasing it, that the left reacts one way, the right reacts another, and then there's the centre. So the Irish Times, I don't know what their ideological stance is, but they were saying, "Oh, this has got racists into a storm." I don't think it is racist to just not be that fond of the idea of um, if you grew up with the 1989 Little Mermaid, that's what your memory is. So I don't think it's racist to not be so fond of the new adaptation of it. Now, it would be racist if people decided to troll Halle Bailey, not to be confused with Halle Berry. Apparently, that's already happened. I honestly have never heard of her before. She's an R&B singer. Um, I'm sure she's a talented young lady. I'm sure there's nothing in terms of her acting ability or anything like that. But if people trolled her personally, if they sent out abusive messages, if they bullied her in a personal way, that would be horrible. That no one should have to put up with that. But I do think that it's a bit silly to, dismiss people as racists just because they don't like this sort of box ticking. And that's what it comes across as. Because Disney has previously been accused of whitewashing. So now they're going to the other extreme of just trying to kind of appease um, the identitarians by, casting a black girl in a role that has never been black. I've never seen any other adaptation of The Little Mermaid that is black. And I think there's some scope for flexibility because she is a fictional character. But what we're now seeing in Hollywood and actually in the British film industry as well is identity politics seeping into everything. So, for example, the film Mary Queen of Scots, which was released earlier this year, historic biopic about Mary Queen of Scots, that attracted a lot of controversy because of the sheer amount of what people perceive to be politically correct tokenism. There was, for example, British Chinese actress Gemma Chan played the role of Bess of Hardwick. Now, Bess of Hardwick was clearly a middle aged white woman. If you look at her portrait, check it on Wikipedia, check other sources. Um, then there was a Black Lord, forget his name now, and there were other BME extras. This just looks so ridiculous. Nothing to do with her acting ability, but it was just looked like such tokenism. And I think historic context does matter. In 16th century Britain, there would have been very, very few visible minority peoples. Not none. There would have been Ottoman and Turkish traders in London, for example. So I'm not saying it was like all white. I'm not saying that, but I think historical authenticity does matter. Are we going to get to a situation where an Asian will play Shaft or a black person will play Queen Victoria? I mean, that's where I think it goes too far, where it's kind of like, oh, historical authenticity has no merit whatsoever. I think it does. Now, to be fair, what some minority people might rightly argue is, well, look, for years Hollywood was whitewashing. So, for example, there were films in the past which cast white actors in minority roles. So, for example, I watched The Inn of the Sixth Happiness recently, starring Ingrid Bergman, about the British missionary Gladys Aylward who went to China. It's a great movie. I mean, I've always been fond of the film, but there is some obvious whitewashing going on. For example, Robert Donat played a Chinese Mandarin. Um, Kurt Jürgen played a mixed race Chinese officer. So, well, I should say Eurasian officer, but it was definitely, there were some, like the children in the film were from Liverpool's Chinatown. I do think that there's some context for that insofar as it would have been difficult for a Western studio to film in 1950s China. So I suppose you can have a little bit of more allowance for older films in that sense. But I think what bugs people is this. If today you had a white actor play a role of a black or Asian person, there would be an almighty outcry. There would be calls for the film to be banned. There would be protest marches. There would be shouts of racism. It would just be absolutely, a big thing. And the studio, the director, and everyone involved would be accused of whitewashing. And yet, when a minority actor plays a white role, and I'm not talking about Ariel, I'm talking about, for example, what I've just named in Mary Queen of Scots, then hey, that's progress, that's diversity. So there's obvious double standards there in terms of what is perceived to be racism. In other words, why is it racist for a white person to portray another role, but it's not racist if a black or Asian person does it? I think a lot of people find that double standard very galling, because we know what the response would be if it was the other way around. Um, I think with a fictional story like The Little Mermaid, there is a bit more scope for flexibility and interpretation. But I still think with this casting, it's purely to deflect claims of whitewashing, but there's really no need for that because everyone knows that. I mean, if these adaptation of Disney films, we've seen Aladdin, we've seen other the Lion King's coming out, Beauty and the Beast. Um, so we're kind of going through this phase of Disney going for live action films. If the Little Mermaid had been a white actress, I don't think anyone on either side would have complained because everyone knows that she was, at least in the public mind, white. I mean, yes, it's a fictional story, but people remember that 1989 Ariel, and it's not that she has to be exactly the same, but it does make you wonder if, the guy playing Aladdin is Asian. The person who played Belle in Beauty and the Beast was Emma Watson, who's white. So why go with this in The Little Mermaid? It makes you wonder. Um, I mean, imagine the outcry if a white actress played Mulan. So that's where I take issue with identity politics in the film industry, the double standards of it. If this worked both ways, then you could say, oh, it's in the public domain. I mean, the rights to the Little Mermaid, Hans Christian Andersen is long dead, so the rights to his work, I guess, are in the public domain. But I think it's just the double standards that people find galling. That it's only racist if it's white people doing it. I mean, fundamentally, that is what we're seeing. And so often you hear about, oh, Hollywood is all this or all that. There's now a drive to actually go to the other extreme. I mean, Crazy Rich Asians promoted itself on being Asian only. Hey, that's progress. But you can just imagine if there was uh, a TV show or a film or a series that promoted itself on being white only, it would be accused of pure racism. Arguably, it would be pure racism. So I think for a lot of people, and you could see this in the generic consensus of opinions on this, it's the double standards that people find galling. That is not racist, okay? It's not racist to say, well, I've nothing against this actress, but I just prefer the 1989 version. That's what I grew up with. And also to say, I think this is Disney just trying to virtue signal, just trying to tick boxes. For me personally, like I said, I don't know anything about Halle Bailey, and I wish her well. I'm sure it'll be an entertaining film, but to me, it's just too obvious what they're trying to do, and I don't really see why, other than to say, oh look, we've done the right thing, we haven't whitewashed, and ultimately that would be to please a relatively small number of people. So why? I really don't think that there are that many hardcore racists out there in this day and age. I'm not saying it doesn't exist, but I think that what what is often perceived to be so-called racism is just people getting a little bit tired of political correctness and tokenism and identity politics being rammed into every format of entertainment. I mean, the Hollywood's totally shackled by it these days. You cannot watch the Oscars without a lecture about, particularly about racial issues. And if it was, it's all fun and games and it's directed at everyone, that would be okay. But no, if you're white, you have to shut up because, hey, you're privileged. So, this sort of nonsense is going to push people to extremes. I don't think there are that many people who are actually hardcore racists, but this sort of identity politics will push people to that, unfortunately, because then they'll start to feel defensive, they'll feel under siege, and it'll just become a ridiculous tribalized situation. So, what's wrong with some authenticity, some consistency in terms of how a character is meant to be? I mean, I, for example, think that Bond should be pretty much with the way Ian Fleming wrote Bond. That's why Bond shouldn't be a woman. It's not because of sexism, right? There's nothing wrong with a woman playing the role of a spy. Fine, make a film about that. Just don't call her Bond. It's just like you take a creative idea and you change it so much that it's unrecognizable. And I think that's the problem. So I appreciate not everyone will agree with me on this, but that's my take on it. And I totally understand black and Asian people feeling irked off if you had, for example, white actors playing roles that are obviously, like, say, for instance, you had a white actress play Mulan, but I don't think that would happen because no studio would risk it. They would know what the backlash would be. But because, this is a black girl playing a character that was in the public mind seen as white, then the only, the backlash is kind of seen as worth it. Oh, well, it's white people complaining, so they must be racists. Yeah, in other words, white people are going to be called racist either way. The racist if they don't like um, the identity politics being imposed on characters that are white, and the racist if they whitewash. So the racist either way, and it's that sort of disproportionate focus on white people. I think irritates a lot of people, and not just white people. Incidentally, I've seen a number of people of Asian descent commenting on Melissa Chen's thread, saying they thought it was box ticking and ridiculous. So let me know your thoughts. But I'll close with this. I just think that it's unfortunate the whole entertainment industry is being shackled by this. And these people who are constantly like, oh, this film isn't diverse enough, this film doesn't tick the right boxes, they are really, they're taking all the joy and all the fun and all the innocence out of entertainment. And that's really sad.